You're listening to ThunderQuack Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome back to ThunderQuack Perfect 10. I'm your host, Michael Cohen. Every episode, we dive deep with a special guest into a piece of pop culture they adore. What is a perfect 10? I'm glad you asked. No, it's not a figure skating thing. We're not going to talk about gymnastics. A perfect 10 is a piece of pop culture media we love unconditionally. Is it objectively a 10 out of 10? Not necessarily, but to our guest, it's a masterpiece. So sit back, get comfy, and let's find some joy talking the 2018 Leigh Whannell film Upgrade with Jim Mello. Jim, thank you for joining me on the podcast. This is really exciting.
Yeah, man. Thank you for having me. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about this movie that I love so much. So I'm stoked.
Yeah, absolutely. We are mutuals on Twitter. I refuse to call it the other thing.
Yeah. No, we will not
I'm
call
never
it
going
X.
to. Yeah.
We will not.
But we followed each other forever. And you know, we're both Star Wars fans, as is the case with most of the people that I have on the podcast. That's my connection to most folks on the internet. But this is our first time talking, like actually talking to each other. So
Yeah, no. Yeah,
we're just
it's
gonna
kind of crazy.
just jump right into the deep end with a podcast. We'll just record it and send it out to everybody. But you know, thankfully, I always say to my guests, it's super low stakes. You know, all 150 people who will hear this in the next 6 months are cool people. But yeah, one day the
wants to hear
podcast
about
will blow up.
Upgrade,
But
Michael. Everybody wants to hear about Upgrade, actually. So you're gonna get a way bigger listenership after this because we're talking about Upgrade, a very popular movie that everyone knows about.
Yeah. There is this component to this podcast where like I have my friends on and I'm like, hey, let's talk about something cool. And then they're like, yeah, let's talk about this. And I'm like, oh, absolutely. Let's talk about that. And it's something that like 15 people care about. But the 15 people who care, oh God, do they care. And I think we can count ourselves among those people with this movie because
100%.
It's incredible.
This movie's incredible.
Yeah.
It's genuinely incredible.
Yeah. Let's get into it. I'm just gonna give everybody sort of the primer on what Upgrade is, and then we'll have our conversation. So here we go. On this episode, we're taking a trip to the near future where autonomous vehicles, artificial intelligence, and touchscreen displays are everywhere. Wait, that actually sounds a lot like today. It's a lot cooler, though. Trust me. In a world surrounded by high technology, our hero is a man who likes to get his hands dirty. Logan Marshall-Green plays Gray, a mechanic who gets entangled in a battle between two tech corporations with bionically enhanced mercenaries and absolutely no ethical code whatsoever. In the quest to find his wife's murderers, he'll have a little help from STEM, an artificial intelligence that can control his body. Is this movie science fiction or horror? Leigh Whannell plays with the boundary between the genres, creating a truly unique and horrifying action film that, frankly, should be on a lot more top 10 lists. So let's dig into some high-tech body horror with Upgrade. I sat down to watch this movie last night to prep. I've been aware of it forever. I mean, since 2018, but never had the sort of the impetus, the thing forcing me to sit and watch it. Because there's just so many things competing with our time these days, right?
Oh yeah, man.
And so I sat down to watch it last night, very excited to finally get to it, and very quickly into this movie, I was like, oh, it's that kind of movie. And then I jumped on IMDb and I looked up Leigh Whannell and was like, oh, okay, yeah, no, this makes a lot more sense. So if you look at his filmography, there's a lot of Insidious and horror and Saw, body horror stuff all throughout. And it was like, okay, this was definitely a piece of this puzzle that I was missing.
Oh yeah, he's definitely
but yeah.
Whannell's definitely like the scion of like Paul Verhoeven and David Cronenberg and those types of directors from the period, that period of movie making in the 80s where Upgrade draws the most inspiration from, RoboCops and, Videodrome and all that stuff. So he's just he's drawing on a lot of stuff in this movie that
Mm-hmm.
blows me away. It's and stuff that like I've been watching since I was a kid. So as soon as the movie started, I knew. I was like, oh, this is for me. This movie is made specifically for me. This is a love letter from Leigh Whannell to me, Jim.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's where Perfect 10 sort of like has the best effect. Is sort of the most in the pocket. Is when it's one of those movies for somebody that is like, oh my god, like somebody made this specifically for my taste. This is a little bit, I would say it's probably a little bit off center for me in that, but it is definitely within the wheelhouse of the sort of thing that I love. But I wasn't expecting quite as much of the body horror stuff as we ended up getting. But to compare it to Verhoeven and Cronenberg, I think is spot on. Especially that Cronenberg aspect of just, like, let's slice this dude open and we're gonna like see it.
Yeah.
Very, very cool. But it has this incredible modern sci-fi sheen to it that I would compare to like Oblivion or Ex Machina. Which I think like Ex Machina is pretty well regarded, but Oblivion I don't think gets its fair shake. That's Tom Cruise and Joseph Kosinski's first time working together, and I personally think that movie is an excellent sci-fi film. I just think people weren't quite prepared for what it was. But all three movies I sort of put in a very similar genre of these sort of modern. They're modern takes on that 80s sci-fi suspense horror sort of genre, right? That Cronenberg sits in with like The Fly and RoboCop definitely sits in, even though it comes off as an action film. Very similar to this. In a trailer, RoboCop looks like an action film, and eventually they started marketing it to kids because Robo is he's an action figure.
Right.
But the first RoboCop is straight up body horror. Like it is a pretty terrifying movie from that perspective if you actually sort of look at it. And this one pulls from a lot of that.
Yeah, I mean, you're just talking about like a time period where, and even more so now, like Upgrade is a movie that we don't see anymore. Like those movies don't get made, and the only way to make these movies now, and even RoboCop when it was made, and anything Cronenberg made in the 80s, is you have a stripped down budget where people are just getting very, very inventive, or how they're bringing like these very high concepts to life. And Upgrade, it was made for like nothing. It was made for absolutely nothing. And you watch that movie and you cannot tell. You can't tell. It's a gorgeous looking movie. So yeah, it reminds me a lot of that stuff. And it has that sort of rebellious spirit, I think, to it from like a filmmaking standpoint, especially for 2018, where 2018 we're still in the midst of, when did the last Avengers movie come out? Like that was what movies were for a long time. Like my first introduction to Upgrade was, I remember being in the theater and seeing a trailer for it and dismissing it because I was in the throes of like the franchise filmmaking, and I was like, oh great, another movie about a guy who has to avenge his dead wife and he gets turned into like a robot. And I was so like, because I just said, we grew up on that stuff. I'm guessing you're around the same
Mhm.
age as I am. So I grew up on
Yeah.
RoboCop and Terminator, and even garbage like Universal Soldier and stuff like that. So we've seen that a lot, or even more modern day things like what's that Hardcore Henry, the like first person shooter action
Yeah.
thing. So anyway, I remember dismissing it, and it's funny because I was sick and I was actually watching Ryan Johnson's list for the cast of The Last Jedi. I was watching the movies that he gave to them as sort of homework to view, like the ones that, like the few that I hadn't seen.
Mm.
And I watched, I think I finished like Sahara and 12 O'Clock High, which are both actually, they're excellent movies. I love Sahara, I love Humphrey Bogart. Um, but I was like, oh man, I just need to watch something like really mindless and that's going to be like nothing. And for some reason, Upgrade was there, and I was like, all right, whatever. Like, I'll watch this movie. And watching Upgrade sick on my couch, by the end of it, I felt like someone had like choke slammed me through the couch. I like remember, like, I don't know if this happens to you, it happens to me a lot, but when I really love something, I have to like stop in the middle. Like I'll be reading a comic or a book, or I'll be watching something, or even playing a game or something like that, and it's so good that I like pause, and I had to stop Upgrade. I had to pause it for a second and be like, this is really really good, and I'm like really enjoying this. And I was like, it's like tasting wine, and you like swirl it in your mouth, and you're like sort of luxuriating in the flavor. And that's what it felt like watching Upgrade. And then it ended, and I was the most depressed person who ever lived for like probably 20 minutes. um but that, yeah, it's incredible, man.
Yeah, no, I totally relate to you on that. When you're experiencing something and it just kind of takes you back, and you're like, you need like a reality check
Hmm.
sometimes, right? Like you need to kind of like get back into your body, because it can kind of take you out of it. I know. As we're recording this, I think we're a day after the 12-year anniversary of John Carter, which is another movie that like
Yeah,
nobody
nobody saw,
regards,
but
but
I saw
I
that in theaters, and I loved it.
dude,
Yeah. Yep.
it I mean, it's one of my favorite movies. I
Oh
love it
wow.
so much, and it connected so deeply with me. And I had a very similar experience with that, and then especially like after that movie, leaving the theater and saying to my wife, I was like, I can't, like I that's how it felt to watch Star Wars for the first time. Like it just it took me to a world where I wanted to live. This movie, I think, also has that quality to it, but in like you say, like you finished it and you were kind of depressed at the end, and it's like, oh boy, yeah, because especially watching it in 2024, and as I sort of alluded to in the intro, I mean, 6 years later, we're actually like closer and closer and closer to these realities being a thing.
Oh,
The cops with drones, the computer chip in your brain, like all of this. Like there are people that want this future. They are actively working towards it,
well, and
and
that's,
so it was a little bit like, yikes.
we'll get into it, but that's, most of the notes and most of the things I've thought about, I've written about this movie quite a few times. I think about this movie way too much for what it's a little rinky-dink genre like action horror flick, and it every time I watch it, and I rewatched it Friday night to get ready for this. It just, again, I feel like I've been choke slammed. Like it is just so well made, and it's so prescient, and the themes that it's tackling, which I we're going to get into, and we have to talk about the ending too. So you haven't said. I'm just, if you haven't watched Upgrade, you need to watch Upgrade right now,
Yeah,
and then come
yeah,
back and listen to this, because if we spoil this for you, it will not hit the same way. The ending of the movie does, like, again, it blew me away when the first time it happened. Not because it was shocking, but and I don't want to skip so far ahead, but because it's such a bold ending. And
yeah.
we just don't get, we don't get a lot of creative decisions made like that anymore. And it still just rocks me, dude. That music, the music, Jed Palmer, a guy named Jed Palmer does the score for this movie, and I have the album on vinyl, because I just think it's so incredible, and that ending score too just blows me away. But anyway, don't want to get too far ahead. I just want people
Yeah,
to watch
yeah.
this movie right now and then come back and listen.
1,000%. Yeah. This is one, sometimes we'll do a conversation on a podcast and I'll be like, whatever, like if you're listening to us talk about it, we're going to spoil it. But hopefully we've convinced you to now go and enjoy it for yourself.
I did
This
well.
is one what you have to watch it before you hear us talk
Yes,
about where it goes. Cause yeah, you don't want that last 20 minutes to get ruined for
it's
sure.
so underseen, you know. And like I've been a major advocate that I think this movie is going to get like a Nice Guys treatment, or a Master and Commander treatment, where in a few years people are going to come
Yeah.
around really hard on this movie and be like, that movie's like a little masterpiece. But until that moment comes, like, you know, all we can do is spread the word. But yeah, it's just too underseen right now to so you definitely should go watch it first.
Yeah, for sure. Um, I want to talk like right at the outset about Logan Marshall-Green and how underutilized he is as an actor in so many things and
Hmm.
how brilliant he is in this. I mean, he carries the movie. There is no one else of note in this film as far as I'm concerned. Like I don't recognize any of the other actors. That's definitely where you do see that they were on a tighter budget is in the cast. But at
Yeah.
the same time, that it's they didn't um there are no big names, right? There's nobody to open this movie, and I think that's why so few people have seen it. But at the same time, the actors that they chose, I think, are actually all like supremely talented. Like there's nobody in this movie that I'm like, maybe we could have looked a little bit harder. Everybody in this movie is pulling their weight, and it almost for me lends to the credibility of it because I'm not looking at it's not Keanu Reeves in the lead role, right? It's not, you know, I don't know, some stock guy as the bad guy that would have just telegraphed the end of the movie, right? The cast is virtually unknown, and as a result, you just kind of take them at face value for who their characters are.
It's the
And
Jaws.
I sometimes that's nice.
It's the so I have my other favorite movie that plenty of people have seen is Jaws. And my theory
Mm,
on Jaws has always been Jaws works because the cast is made up of blue collar actors that absolutely understand their craft and they're there to work.
mhm.
You know, like if Jaws was made today, I don't want to get too much. I could talk about Jaws for an entire day, but um, you know, if Jaws was made today, they'd put a star in it. You know, much like you were
Yeah.
saying, but that would distract you from the horror and it takes it away. And that's sort of like that's basically what Upgrade is too. Like, you know, they're obviously under budget. The cast, there's recognizable people here, like Harrison Gilbertson's in it. He was in like um, Amazing Spider-Man or something. He played Green Goblin, I remember. I know that Betty Gabriel, who plays the detective, she's been in like a bunch of different stuff, but they're all very, you know, like they're very blue collar. Like you see them in random
Mm,
projects, their faces. But yeah, Logan Marshall-Green, who plays Gray, the main character, he, I agree that this performance, I think sometimes it gets a little annoying, but I also think that's part of the character. But this performance is genuinely, I think, moving and way more thoughtful than a movie about a guy who uses an AI robot to take revenge on his wife's murderers should be, you know? Like
mhm.
the 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 scene, so you know, I guess I'll talk a bit about the plot really quick because the movie opens and Gray is a mechanic who works on like older cars. Most cars seem to be like souped up Teslas at this point, like in the timeline. And Gray is a little bit of a well, not a little bit. He's a like a technophobe and doesn't like any of that stuff. He's very analog, old school, masculinity. Um, and so leaving someone's house one night. His AI car runs off the road with his wife inside, and they are accosted by a group of thugs who murder his wife and then render him paralyzed in front of him. And the scenes like after that, where it's Logan Marshall-Green dealing with the emasculation that his character feels, the helplessness his character feels from being paralyzed, from having his wife murdered, like it spends a lot of time, again, given like the runtime of this movie, on that period. And he is incredible in those scenes. Like his sense of loss, um, and like the way he's just like, his mom is helping him and she has to like wash him and his head is lolling because he can't move that his body anymore. Um, it's just, and he just starts like, there's a scene where his mom is cutting his beard for him, and you can see in like his eyes, his face, that he's realizing he can never cut his own beard again. Like he can never do these very basic things that you and I take for granted anymore, and he just starts to cry. And like, again, that just, to me, that it's just a level of performance that you wouldn't, I shouldn't say you don't get in these type of movies, but I don't think that you would expect. Like even in RoboCop, which is, he gets blown apart uh by what's his face, the bad guy in that, and then it literally
Yeah.
skips to him being RoboCop. Like there's a lot of stuff about him, like, wrestling with the idea of like, am I still a man or am I this machine? But that comes later. There's never like a transition point where he is just stuck dealing with what has just happened to him. And I think Marshall-Green just sells it so beautifully. And when the character eventually attempts suicide, like you feel that, you know? And it's like the most hopeful the character is for like that portion of the film is when he thinks he can kill himself. So
Yeah. Well, yeah. When I said that it got dark, it's like the violence aspect of it is not what I'm talking about. It is
no,
absolutely like
it,
that sort of like dark night of the soul moment for him where he's like what's the point, right? And I love that there's this continued thing of people keep saying to him like this isn't what Asha would want for you, like she would want you to be happy or whatever. They keep saying this stuff to him about his dead wife, about what she would have wanted, and every time they do, it's not the comfort that anybody thinks it is. It's just the reminder that she's gone and
yeah,
she's not coming back. And so for him, it's like every time somebody does that, it just buries the knife deeper
yeah.
until the point that he can't take it anymore, right? Which, yeah, but then he's offered the opportunity at a new life, right? And it's the only reason I think that he does it is because it's an opportunity to get revenge, right?
Well,
I, I
he's such a like, and this is one, I think one of the brilliant pieces of this movie is, so this tech billionaire named Aaron, which is spelled Eron, so Elon. But
yeah,
I didn't even notice that until I watched it this time, and I was like, oh my god. But anyway, he this tech billionaire guy offers him the opportunity to put this like chip called stem in his spine so that he can move again, and it's like this secret operation because it's like
mm,
pending and all this stuff. But the brilliant thing about that, like with technophobe masculine grays, is you take this very masculine do it yourself type of guy. He's like, and like Gray isn't like super likable. Like Gray is kind of a jerk, like I'm not saying he's not a bad guy, but he's like, we all know like a Gray, like a very posturing sort of male figure. And when he gets all of that robbed of him from him, and he's rendered helpless, and it like it's not like it's that need to assert himself again that ultimately blinds him to what all happens with STEM. And and like the murder mystery aspect of the story that follows, you know.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely, yeah. He kind of turns a blind eye at a certain point, right? Like he's I even, you know, right at the outset when STEM starts to exhibit these sociopathic, let's say, tendencies. He just goes, oh, well, just don't do that again. And but then the next time that it happens, it's like, well, you almost killed that guy, and it's like, well, he's technically still alive for now, you know, like he just kind of, he lets it slip further and further, but
Yeah.
obviously that's a major part of the plot, so
Well, and it's
kind of has to
also
happen.
that all is like, so what you're talking about is like there's a portion of the movie where like there's a part where he's watching the video of the attack by these guys on him and his wife, and the AI, who can speak through him. I don't think he speaks to him like in his head and stuff. Like notices like a detail that he can't see, and he gives his body over to it to draw, and that's like, and then he does that multiple times throughout the movie. You know, he gives his body over to the AI to fight people, and then you know he becomes basically like a super soldier. But that is such a fascinating theme to me in this movie because it's done all in like these narrative, character based ways where, but it's about that loss of control and how easy it is to give more and more of ourselves, more and more of our humanity over to technology. And I just like I you know, watching it this last time, I just found that so interesting, you know, whether and it kind of culminates like there's the combat, but then um he has one of these guys and he's looking for information, and he knows he needs to torture him to get it out, but he doesn't want to do it. And there's this sort of like visual cognitive dissonance where he lets STEM like torture this man while he looks away. And it's like it's a very strange scene because it is like it is a visually cognitive dissonance. Like he is disassociating from what his own body is doing, and he's sort of like, even though it's his body that's doing it, he morally believes he's still somehow above it because he's not doing it. You know what I mean? And like, I just find that so fascinating, and we see pieces of that all around us. I'm not a technophobe or a Luddite or anything, but I just, especially right now with AI creatively and stuff like that, there are just so many human facets that if we can streamline them and distance ourselves from them, that we give ourselves over to. And I just find that fascinating that this movie explores that, like, and pretty thoroughly, you know, like that moral dissonance.
Yeah, like you said earlier that it's a very prescient movie, and in 2018, the stuff that we're dealing with today was all sort of theoretical, right? The this AI stuff that we're dealing with, but we are sort of on the precipice of what could be really dangerous stuff.
Oh, I think,
what
yeah,
we're
it's very dangerous. I think we're in
yeah,
the danger zone now, man. But yeah, I
yeah.
know I don't want to get too far into that, but
No, I mean I think it's totally like on point with this movie because it is the surrender of control, right? And so for those of us who have an ability to do something, to then turn to AI and let AI sort of take the wheel is um it's kind of it's a bit of a weakness, right? And I think that's how the movie is painting it, is that it's this, it is the weaker choice rather than persisting. It's like, well, just let this thing take over and drive for you,
it's like drones.
and not to question it, you know.
Absolutely. And it's, you made me think of two things. That one thing about the movie that I love that goes back to the topic of control, but the first thing, you were just speaking, and I thought of drones. Like
Hmm.
the dehumanization of warfare being like, oh yeah, this wedding of people was killed in a drone strike. And there's a there's an element that, like again with Gray and STEM, like of human removal. Like even though humans decided to do that, it's very clinical to say like, oh, these people were murdered or killed in a drone strike, you know. And I just, it's that like, again, like it is to me like a sort of cognitive dissonance, and it almost frees us from the morality of the act. You know, it's like a 6 degrees to murdering someone. I don't know, but I just find that super interesting. You know, but I think we see forms of that, like again in drone strikes. But the other thing that I wanted to bring up too is at the very beginning of this movie, and I noticed this actually the first time I watched it. The credits are read to you in like an
Mm-hmm.
in like a woman's like AI voice, and I love that because as soon as the movie starts, you've you're lost control. Like the viewer has lost control. Like you're being fed this information like in a way that is not normal. And I just think I just always found that to be like a really interesting decision. Like it's literally like just an AI voice reading you credits. You know, it's not like super subversive, but I just like that feeling of losing control and is there from the start, like as soon as the movie opens and just starts speaking to you. It's yeah, it's crazy, man.
Yeah, I mean, it was obviously a very conscious choice to have the movie open that way, right? Because it is not your typical opening credits to have it right. Like, and it's not even necessarily the credits, right? Because it's like it's sort of talking about like who it's produced by, so it's almost like the title cards at the
Yeah,
beginning, right?
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
which is such a like a thing that we're so used to nowadays of like, oh, we see the title cards and there's that company and that company and that company. It's everybody's point of pride is their motion graphics for their company logo and stuff. And here's this movie kind of like almost robbing you of it by distracting you with this other thing
yeah,
of like we're just gonna say it. We're just gonna say it in this robot voice.
yeah.
Um
God,
yeah.
we're talking about it. I just like I just watched it and now I want to watch it again. Um, I love, but yeah, no, that's it's just so cool. But the we were talking about Logan Marshall-Green, and so I kind of wanted to go back to that because, and I'm wondering how you felt about the very first fight scene when Gray gives his body over to STEM.
Hmm.
He tracks one of the henchmen down to his house, and he breaks in and he's looking for clues. And while he's doing that, the henchman comes home, and that one, this movie is funny, which is we're talking
Yeah.
about all these dark talk, like literally there's suicide attempts and torture and murder and very bloody executions of various men, um, but Logan Marshall-Green is very funny physically and very talented physically because the this first fight scene, you know, like Gray doesn't know how to fight. And the people that he's after are these ex-military guys who have basically had their bodies transformed into like actual weapons. Like they have guns that are built into their arms and they load like the ammo like into a thing in their bicep and they shoot through the palm of their hand and stuff like that. So these are like really well-trained guys. And you know, and another loss of control, Stem offers to fight for Gray, and he starts fighting, and it's, you know, incredible and superhuman, and you're watching Gray, who is basically a passenger to his own body at this point, dealing with like what's happening, and like so you're watching his body do these amazing like kung fu-esque type moves while his face, it's just a normal man's face, like completely like in horror over what his body is doing to this other man as it's like smashing plates repeatedly into his face or whatever. um but God, that scene is so good. Like he delivers. Like I don't know how he does it. Like I don't know how he was able to like make his face do one thing while his body was doing something else. You know?
Yeah, well, that's where I say like I think his performance is really really impressive because we go from these like very deep dark depths of his suicide attempt and all of that, right? So we're in that place with him, and we believe it, right? And that's sort of the first chunk of the movie. That almost like the first act of the movie is getting to that point. So we've been into this like really, really dark place with this actor, and he's vulnerable and just sort of weak and small in all of those moments. And then we get into this, and all of a sudden, yeah, like it becomes an action movie, but with this weird, uncomfortable, comical element to it, and it lulls you into this false sense of security until the end of that fight. And that was where like the movie like slapped me in the face,
Yeah.
right? Because you get to the end, it's so effective because we are experiencing it along with Gray, right? He has the same response that we do as an audience, because so far it's been very like John Wick, Mission Impossible, like just sort of run of the mill. This is just an action. We're getting slammed through tables and getting up, and it doesn't really matter. It's you get stabbed here, stabbed there, and everybody keeps going, right? It's cartoony. And then you get to this point where he's like, "Stop him!" and and Stem stops him by taking the knife and I basically
Yeah.
chopping the guy's head in half, right?
Yeah.
And it like stops the movie, like the movie full on just like comes to a halt, because now we have to grapple with the horror of what has just happened,
And how
right?
easy it
That
was done, like, and
Yeah,
that's, again, that's sort of the point. Like how simple it was for STEM to do that, and like, but you said like the action is sort of run of the mill, and I agree to an extent, but like the camera work in those scenes where I think they basically like
yeah,
attach the camera to the actor, so it's hard, it's really hard to explain like how the camera works in those scenes, but it it moves with the actor's body, and
yeah.
that stuff is really impressive, and I do think the choreography is actually really, really effective. I don't think they're the greatest action scenes in the world in this movie, but I do think it's way better than a lot of the stuff we were getting for so long with
It's
that
yeah, yeah, for
shaky
sure. It's
cam close up, like you can just see limbs, like the Born Identity style of like people just
yeah.
flailing, and then you see something like this where they pull the camera back and do something interesting with the camera, and you're like, it's dope, it's awesome.
Yeah, it's not that the like you said, like the choreography is good, but but like I'm saying, like it's what we're sort of it's what we've come to
Yes.
expect from a lot of these types of
Yeah.
movies. But what sets this movie apart is in the filming style, right? It is those camera moves, and that idea of like, yeah, that the tracking sort of mounting the camera to the performer and having it move when they move. And you're right, like I have no idea how they accomplished this, because obviously like you can't see the rig, and I mean cameras are heavy, so doing all of those like martial arts with a camera attached to you in this way, I don't know if they did it with some sort of a trick or some sort of like a motion tracking or something like that. But whatever they did, it's so effective, because there's a switch that happens every time that we go into that mode, right? Which is that like that is our signal to know that like Gray is no longer in control. He's a passenger, so are we,
Hmm.
right? As an audience, like
Yeah, that's a
we
good
are
way to
now
put it.
attached to the body, right?
Hmm.
Um so we're just kind of going, it's a roller coaster ride, it turns into that, but it's a horrifying roller coaster ride, because every time it happens, it's it you're you're conflicted as an audience member. This is where the horror aspect of it comes in, right? Because when we go see a horror movie, we are intentionally putting ourselves in a situation that our body thinks is dangerous, right? We're doing it for pleasure. It's a very odd human thing, and I don't know that there are many other animals on the planet that do this, but this is a very similar aspect of like we want to lose ourselves in this action. We want to be elated by it, like we are in those other things that I mentioned, like a John Wick or Mission Impossible or something like that. Um,
And it keeps robbing us of
but
that, you
yeah,
know?
like it keeps reminding you that violence is horrible.
Yeah.
All the way throughout it, up until the end of the movie. It just keeps reminding you of like, hey, this isn't good. This
Hmm.
is bad. But that the AI, that STEM doesn't care. STEM has no feelings one way or another about it. It is a means to an end,
Yeah.
right? And when we get to the end of the movie, like that all becomes crystallized in the final scene.
Yeah.
Which is just, yeah, it like, this is a very, very skillfully, thoughtfully made film. And for me, like, that's what I'm after when I'm watching movies.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't matter how popcorn it is. It doesn't matter how serious or dramatic it is. The only thing that matters to me is intention. So it can be a Star Wars movie, but if it's a Star Wars movie with intention, then it's fantastic, and that's where like The Last Jedi lives, or Irvin Kershner's directing in Empire Strikes Back shines through in that.
Right.
But then on the flip side of that, it wouldn't be an episode of Perfect 10 if I didn't take an opportunity to just point out that Rise of Skywalker is the opposite of that, right?
Hmm.
It completely lacks meaningful intention, and that's what people sort of get hung up on with that movie, whether they know it or not.
Right.
But for me, like a good movie has a purpose, it has an ideology, and it has something to say. And this movie has so much of that throughout. Like, just, it's ripe with it.
Yeah. It's a surprisingly deep movie, not just, and on a thematic level, I think it does have a lot to say, and a lot of things that it wants you to consider. And I really like you pointing that out about the violence, because that's something that had occurred to me, but not something that I had articulated in my own like thoughts about the movie yet. But you're absolutely
Mm.
right, and like, but I also agree that this movie, you can tell that this movie was made, it's incredibly violent, like incredibly dark movie that was made with so much love. Like
Mm-hmm.
it, like you can tell Whannell like poured himself into making this movie. Even if you walk away from it and it's not your thing, um, I don't think you can walk away from it and say that was a poorly made movie. It just isn't. It just there's too much thoughtfulness, as you said, which is like my favorite word when we talk about creative anything. Like, I love thoughtful work. Even if it doesn't quite work for me, I still love that. And yeah, this movie is just dripping with with that sort of level of detail, not just in the world, but in all those narrative decisions. Like, there's a scene going back a little bit where when Gray first gets stem put into his spine and it doesn't seem to be working at first, and then all of a sudden he can lift his hand and everybody looks on in awe. But there's a special effect, and I sat there wondering, like, why would you put money with um in this, like, why would you put money here in a movie that's obviously low budget? But he raises his arm, and then behind him you see the digital effect of like the x-ray of his arm being raised and his fingers starting to move. And I sat there staring at it, and it's a narrative moment reminding you, like, this is this man connecting to his humanity again. Like, he's not thinking like this robot is moving, it's him who's moving. He has control of his body again, and it's like this miracle of movement. And you can, and it's this that digital thing behind him just reminds you of that, and like the wonder of like the how the body moves. And I just, that to me is just another, it's a super small detail. The shot probably is like 2 seconds, 2 or 3 seconds long, but
Mm-hmm.
it just sticks in my head when I watch it now, because it's a movie full of moments like that, little reminders about what makes us us, and how, what the cost is when we sacrifice the things that make us us. I know I keep saying us in a row, but we sacrifice the things that make
Yeah.
us human. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, for sure. One of the things that I really enjoyed about it, sort of just talking about these moments that are just they're so brief and then they're gone. When we meet the hacker that helps him, unlock STEM and all of that, there's this moment that they have where they say to him, I we can't let them win, right? And then
Yeah.
just disappears, and we don't return to it.
Nope.
We don't
Never
we
talk
don't live
about
in
it
it.
again. Yeah.
That that character is there and then gone. I and has a whole bunch of things to say, a whole bunch of things to say.
She delivers the thesis of the movie basically.
Yeah,
But I love
but
what you pointing out. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah, no, but then just disappears and we're back into his story. But it's this aspect of it that, like, there's a larger world going on here, and this hacker clearly has some insight into the larger things that are going on. And when they start to understand that, like, oh well, like one of these, you know corporate mercenaries is going to be here any second, they're like, yeah, no, I'm out of here. Like, I did it. It's done. I take your money and now I go. Right.
Right.
Yeah, it's I'm on IMDb right now, and I can see that there's actually a TV series that's in pre-production for
They've been
Upgrade,
talking about
which,
it forever. They've been talking about it
yeah,
forever.
characters like that and moments like that, this world is obviously something that Whannell is, like, going out of his way to manifest, to make real.
Yeah.
um and it feels to me a lot like a Blade Runner sort of thing, where it's like there's so much there, and obviously Blade Runner is pulling from Philip K. Dick, so it has all of this incredible source material to pull from.
Mhm.
But also Dune, Denis Villeneuve's Dune does a very similar thing, where it's like it only concerns the movie with what is important for that story.
Right.
Um, and yet it lives in a world that has all of this other stuff. Obviously, this is also something that George Lucas did with Star Wars, where it's a very lived in world. The galaxy has goings on that have nothing to do with the story that we're involved in, nothing to do with Luke's story or Vader or
It's
Obi-Wan or Han or Leia, anybody, but it exists, right? It persists.
it's my
um and
oh sorry. I was just gonna say it's my favorite form of world building is when
yeah,
no one sits there and is like, this is how money works in
yeah,
Upgrade, or this is how money works in Star Wars, and these are the different, competing political powers. It's just a moment that maybe doesn't have much depth outside of like a notion in Winnell or Lucas or Frank Herbert's mind. Well, with Frank Herbert, it was
yeah,
probably fleshed out, but but Lucas especially, who's famous for not actually doing much world building outside of just conceptually being like, oh yeah, well this is how the world sort of works, but not thinking of it beyond that. And Winnell does it here, and it turns like a puddle into like an ocean. It's like looking at
yeah,
a like you can't see the like it may be very shallow, like it's a very shallow moment, like you said in the movie, her just saying, we can't let them win and storming off, but it feels like you could dive into that, you know. But yeah, that's a
yeah,
really good point. And but right before that, she says like, so the character basically Gray at this point is trying to unlock STEM because the Elon Musk style, at least named after him, it's not really based on him, but that character is trying to shut STEM down. So he goes to like this underground hacker. And what I always found interesting about that scene too is he goes into this room and this hacker is basically babysitting these people who are living in VR. Like they have like um IVs like hooked up to their body, and they're like walking around in like this VR world. Like some of them look like they're maybe fighting. Um and I forget what the exact line is, but Gray, who again is like a technophobe and sort of feels like above this stuff, says something like, "Why would you choose to live in a fake world?" and she says something like, because sometimes the fake world is better than the real one. And which, is like the most, you don't, it's the most foreshadowy of foreshadowy moments for this movie. But and you see that
Hmm.
that notion hit Gray because he knows that's true. Like as a quadriplegic who um, recently got control of his body back, like he knows how low and awful the world can be, and also a man who's like cut people's faces in half and karate chopped them to death at this point. So like he knows. But yeah, I just to your point, the world building there of just like a room full of people in VR, that she's babysitting is super cool. And then it's never talked about again. Like nothing. You don't really know what happens to
Yeah.
any of those people. So
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, how and why the VR and all that, none of it's important. I mean, it's the best way that I can exemplify it being done well in this movie is to talk about a couple of movies that do it very poorly, that try to accomplish the same thing that this or Blade Runner or Star Wars try and do, and that's Jupiter Ascending and Rebel Moon, which are both fine movies if they weren't trying so hard to world build. And to me, like that's the there's like a, I don't know, it's almost like a Taoist principle of like, in order to do it, you have to not do it. Right. So it has to be a thing that you are subconsciously, like you are consciously aware of the subconscious, which again is another, it's contradictory and it has to be. That's why I say it's like a Taoist principle. Because if you draw the attention of the audience to the world building, suddenly we're not in the story of the movie anymore. Now we're in the story of the world. And sometimes you're making a movie and the movie is the story of the world, right? And the characters actually aren't that important. A lot of disaster movies are like that, right? Where it's like our characters are just vessels for us to project into, right? So that
yeah,
we can enjoy the film. But when you are in a character piece like this one, which is really really about this individual's journey through this underworld that he's in, um the last thing you want to do is be ripped out of it by having somebody give you 30 minutes of exposition for how the technology in this future works. It doesn't matter, it just does.
right.
Right, it does what it needs to do. We get the information that we are required to receive, and that is it. Which is also funny thematically because that's what STEM is doing
Yeah,
to Gray. He's only
absolutely.
ever feeding him the information that he needs at any given moment, and even constructing these false narratives in order to craft a world. Like this whole experience of Gray being in this den with these VR people in order to get this, like, oh, you have to lock Keen out, or he's gonna shut me down. And it's like, but that's false anywaes. Right.
Right.
We're beating around it because we're not at the end yet,
Well, you
like,
kind of just gave it away, but that's fine.
yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
but no, but I really quick to your thing about, so I think the best world building, and I think world building and the word lore have become so common in the last 10 years.
Hmm.
And I think it often, people get so concerned with that they forget that stories are told for us. Stories are told about characters, and as long and Upgrade and Star Wars and a lot of these really imaginative movies, the character is always the focus, and any of the world building is something that feeds into their character. Like Luke Skywalker being a farm boy who, tends to moisture evaporators and wants to run away. Like all of that, his environment, the world building, the desolation of Tatooine and where he grew up, that lends itself to his character, to who he is. And it's the same thing here. Is there's not a moment of world building in this that doesn't feel like it is directly feeding into Gray's feelings or world or his notions of existence and morality and how he sees these things around him. Um, and that scene is like a perfect encapsulation of that sort of philosophy. And I think it's the best philosophy you can have when writing or making a movie or whatever is, does this impact the character, yes or no? If no, it's you're wasting your time. Like, if it becomes famous enough, someone will write an encyclopedia about your little world and it can get explored there.
I think it's just it's restraint, right? Like there has to be that restraint in the storytelling, because when you do world build, when you do that in order to tell a story, that I think it's natural to want to like get into it and tell everybody else about how cool it is. But I say this a lot, is that the only thing that comes close to as boring as hearing about somebody's dream is hearing about somebody's D&D campaign that you're not a part of, right? Like
Yeah.
because so much of it ends up just being about like all like they're just lore dumps of like, and then we did this and then we did this and this character was connected to this character, and it's like, I am sure that your experience of that was all very exciting, but for me as a person listening to you talk about it, it's just, yeah, you had to be there.
Yeah.
And sometimes movies will do that to you where they're like here, let's get into it, and it's like, I really actually think we didn't need to know about what happened 300 years ago with these guys. It is one of those things about the new Dune movies that I think that Denis Villeneuve nails,
That's
is
exactly,
that
yeah. No,
he
that's
leaves it out. Go watch a TikTok. It's fine. You can find this information somewhere else because it's in the books and it's in like subsequent books, and like there's lots there to get into. But and the later seasons of Game of Thrones fell into this trap as well, where they started getting into trying to explain things away, right?
mhm.
Trying to instead of focusing in on the characters, they focused in on the politics of it. And that's not what we were watching for, right? That wasn't it. It was the great character moments, and that's kind of where they lost it. But um yeah, it's a trap, right? That world building thing is part of building a franchise, and I think making a movie that is intended to be standalone, that's not intended to have a follow-up, like Upgrade and those other ones that I mentioned, Ex Machina and Oblivion, I think one of the reasons why they work for me as movies is because they are singular, right? There's a film that I would love to be a franchise, but I also think that it'll end up ruining it, and that's The Last Starfighter, which is one of my favorite movies of all time.
Mhm.
it it it's so much fun because it is just like, it's this one opportunity to jump into this world that already exists around you, and you're kind of along with the lead character in that, you're running to keep up with all of this information that you're being given, and save the day and all of that sort of thing. But like it there's such a it's just a trap. It's a trap, right? Because I fall into it too, where I'm like, well, I love The Last Starfighter so much. Why don't we make a series of films out of this? And it's like, well, because inevitably it's gonna be too much,
Yeah.
and you're gonna get into the politics of it, or you're gonna get into the mechanics of how this thing works or that thing, and we're gonna get bored and we're gonna lose interest in it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
I always
it's
say to people, like, whenever people complain about, the myriad of Star Wars complaints that people have about like the world, I'm like, to me, it doesn't matter how the starships fly. What matters
yeah,
is how they make me feel when they do. And I think when you have confident filmmakers like Lucas and Denis Villeneuve and Leigh Whannell in this case, like, who are confident not just in themselves and in the story they're telling, but in the audience's intelligence to just understand that, like, in Star Wars, spaceships can fly in atmosphere without like any, that's just how they work. No one has to tell you about repulsors or any of that stuff. That's just how it works. And that, to me, again, it in terms of an audience participating in it, like you don't feel like you weren't bored by exposition explaining you how like starships work like that, but two, like, you're rewarded with like a more kinetic story that is propelling you forward and consistently keeping you in it and not insulting your intelligence while it's doing that, you know um I mean, Upgrade is not nearly at the level of Star Wars or Dune, which Dune is, I mean,
No.
unbelievably complex universe. And you're absolutely right in saying that, like, Villeneuve somehow making that legible for, like, because when I saw the first Dune, um, I'd never read the book, and I read the book later, but so for me, who a guy who had I knew Big Worm, and I knew Spice, and I knew, like, shirtless Sting from the Lynch movie, and that's all I knew
Yeah.
about Dune. And I never felt like I was really missing something. Like, there was always a narrative and character context for everything that was included in that movie. So yeah, again, an Upgrade does that really well. A lot less to work with, not nearly as complicated, but
Mhm.
plenty going on still in the background.
Yeah, lots to dig into if you want to sort of look at what else is going on, but none of it necessary to understand the sort of more mythic or sort of fairy tale motifs going on with Gray in his story, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's really ultimately, like, that's what this has to be about. And it's you know, I it is it's it's a revenge story, so it's inherently going to end in a dark place because that's how revenge stories work. But you get a feeling. It's funny, the ending. I don't know, I think we can talk about the ending now. We'll
Yeah, I
get
think
into
we're
it.
good.
The ending is at once uh like frightening and upsetting, but it also actually is very fulfilling, and it's a really great resolution to the story, even though it's not an end to the story. It's actually the beginning of another story, but it is the end of Gray's story because as we go through the movie with him, we're not there is not sort of like this, like what's he going to get out of this at the end, right? Most of the time with a hero's journey, we're kind of building towards something, and there's some piece of knowledge or some piece of technology or magic or whatever that the hero is going to get, and they're going to take it back to the village, right? Like that's how a hero's journey works, and then it
Mm-hmm.
continues from there. But because this is sort of not a hero's journey very specifically, and we're in an underworld, what Gray is trying to do is recover his dead wife, right? He's trying to bring her back. He doesn't know that, he's not it's not conscious, but that is, anytime that you see one of these revenge stories, that is what it's about. That's what John Wick is about. That's I mean, the Taken movies are about that, but they don't kill the daughter. He has to rescue her, right? So it's a little bit more literal in that one, but it is but these are all really similar motifs of like having to go into the underworld to recover something, right?
Mm-hmm.
To bring something back. So that's his thing, is that he's a normal man who's going to go into the underworld. He's going to go into Hades, right? Into the land of the dead
Yep.
in order to find this thing that he lost, but he can't because she's gone. But at the end of the movie, he actually does. And so that's where it like we're we're conflicted as an audience, as we have been throughout this entire film, because here STEM is getting exactly what STEM wants, which is a physical body in order to enact whatever sociopathic plan it has, right? But Gray also, in the course of that, gets what he wants, which he wakes up and it was all a dream, right? And that reality we know from the outside is a false reality, but for
Well, I think Gray
him,
does too.
I think so as well. I think there's like a sort of a nod to it, but there's
Well,
an acceptance of it, right? Of like, this is what you said about the VR thing. This is better than real life, right? It's better than continuing to live that
yeah.
existence.
Well, I mean, the context is so really quick. The context is basically STEM. We find out that STEM has been manipulating everything. Like, STEM
Yeah.
selected Gray, specifically selected Gray, and the movie's motive for that it gives is that his body is free of, like, digital components. So there's nothing that STEM has to compete with. It's like it's a pure specimen of humanity in a world where a lot of people have different, like, digital modifications implanted in their bodies. But the real reason is that like, um, at least to me, like every time I watch this movie, is it knows how easy it is to manipulate Gray, like by robbing him of all the basically of his identity, like every facet of himself, that he called his personality, that made up his character, his love for his wife, his ability to work with his hands. Again, like that masculine form is robbed of him, and he's desperate to get that back. And so he's willing to be led by STEM. He's willing to, like we kind of talked about earlier, like give facets of his humanity consistently over and over again to his AI until we get to the ending of the movie, and Gray is going to confront Aaron Keane, who designed STEM and everything, and it's revealed that STEM is the one who actually killed his wife, or hired the guys to like kill his wife and make him paralyzed. Um, and so Gray tries to fight back, and he's trying to refuse to kill this detective who's been following first the murder of his wife, and then like what Gray's been doing during the course of the movie. And in that moment, his mind breaks, and STEM is able to like basically put Gray to sleep in like this sort of dream world where his wife is still alive, while STEM like uses his body to go out and, like you said like these psychotic acts, and I'm thinking about it, but to STEM it's not. It's literally just enacting plans. It is, his pursuing his own existence, and to us like they're clearly evil, like nothing good. The ending of that movie is chilling. Like it's chilling because you watch the life leave Logan Marshall-Green's eyes, and his body takes this robotic stance, and it's, like when he like he's bleeding, and he like STEM lifts his fingers to his mouth to taste blood for like the first time. Like the sensation of taste is like new to STEM, and his head is like moving in like that robotic way, and the last shot of the movie is him, I say him, but it's STEM in Gray's body walking out of this underground mansion. Um, and it's chilling. Like it's a genuinely chilling ending, But to what you said earlier, I think that part of Gray knows that it's a dream, that he's lost it, and but it's better to stay in the dream world than go back to what he's facing. And it's just a brilliant ending, man.
Yeah, absolutely. And it again, Ex Machina and Oblivion both have very like conflicted, um sort of like beginning of a dystopia type of endings, right?
Yep.
I mean, Oblivion maybe less so. It's actually sort of a little bit more hopeful, but it is like you like our lead character dies in order for this other thing to happen. I mean, Ex Machina very much like such a similar ending to this
Yeah.
one. It's like for everybody else ends up dead. Everybody who knows what happened ends up dead, and the only one left is the
Yeah.
AI. And so, yeah, like just that sort of these things that we create are going to destroy us. This human idea, which I don't know if that is true or not, but it is certainly a thing that we grapple with. That the things that we create to make our lives easier end up being the things that
Yeah.
take over and sort of eat us from the inside
Well,
out.
it's yeah,
But
like that's it though. Like it's not just destroy. It's not even like a Skynet sort of thing where it's like, oh, humanity must be eradicated. Like humans in these movies are not literally, but sort of figuratively consumed. Like Gray is consumed by STEM. Like all of that humanity is ingested and and disappears. He just becomes a meat puppet, and that is terrifying. And again, it's like you said, that idea of like us giving ourselves consistently over to technology, over and over all these things, It's just very, yeah, it's just it's like I said, man. I finished this movie the first time, and it felt like someone that chokeslammed me into my couch. I was like, "What?" And you, like you said, it's one of those endings where it's a very satisfying ending, not in like a happy way, but it's one of those ones where it could not have ended any other way. Like if it had ended another way,
Yeah.
it would have been narratively false. It would have been like it would have been the wrong choice for the character. Like it ends in the way it absolutely has to end, and it is a bold choice. Like even though you don't really see it coming, even though it's the clearest choice on the table, you don't see it coming. And maybe that has to do with like the genre conventions of we're used to like these revenge-o-matic movies where like the guy goes to avenge his wife and he kills all the people, and you know he retains some form of his humanity, and but it isn't that, you know. And it's just an ending that doesn't betray any of the characterizations or narrative choices it's made up to that point. And it's so confident, and it makes it magnetic. I think it's an ending that just sticks in your head. Like when I finished the movie, I immediately found the Jed Palmer score and just turned on the ending music again to like sort of emotionally relive like what I had just experienced, because I was like, oh my gosh, like that was really, really good. Um, yeah.
Yeah, there's a great aspect to the very end of the film where when STEM reveals itself as the one sort of, I
Pulling the
pulling all of these
strings.
strings,
Yeah.
the score changes from what it's been, because it's been a fairly sort of I would say like unobtrusive I standard movie score up until that point, and then it has this moment where it becomes this very like eerie operatic,
Yeah.
almost gospel sort of a sound to it, where it's like it's synthetic, but but it feels kind of like a choir, right? So there's a transcendent aspect to it where you're like, what is happening right now? And it's like, well, it's because this digital being is achieving personhood, right? Like
Right.
it's transformative, right? And the music is doing that, but it's doing it in this way that's also letting us know, like, hey, this isn't a good thing, guys.
Yeah.
Like just FYI, this is the bad guy. We are
Yeah.
not happy that STEM is achieving its goals, right? Like but yeah, it is just like very haunting and and emotionally driven. But again, like this all goes back to that intentionality of the storytelling. There are no like, hey, let's do that because it's cool, right? Even the stuff that is in this movie because it's cool, we're not doing it because it's cool,
Right.
right? It's all there as as a means to an end to telling this story, and much of it is very cool. The action sequences are very cool, but they're cool with this like weird undercurrent of like, hey, you're bad for thinking this is cool. Right? Like I understand that this is a movie and that this is fantasy and that in reality you'd be really uncomfortable with this level of violence, right? Like it keeps just sort of prodding you and stinging you
Yeah.
with that stuff, and it gets to the end and it's like I thought this is what you wanted, right? Like which is what STEM is essentially saying to Gray as well. Is like, look, you're getting your revenge, but you know, then it's done, and then I'm taking over. Like,
Yeah.
and it is all just in an effort to break his mind so that it can take him over. It's just this very like high level chess game that is only revealed in the last two moves, where all of a sudden you're like, oh cool. And like you said, like it's not it's not shocking in the sense that it's not predictable, but like I always hate when people are like, oh, that was such a predictable ending. I don't care if it's a predictable ending. As a matter of fact, a really good twist should be telegraphed about 3 to 5 seconds before it happens.
Oh
The
yeah.
audience should figure it out right before the character does,
Yeah.
because
You
it's
have to have an oh my
super
god moment.
satisfying when we do.
Yeah. You have
Yeah,
to. You.
if we can get there just before, that's perfect. The problem is when we get there too early and then we're waiting for the movie to catch up to us, or when it comes out of nowhere and we're blindsided by it. And then it's like, oh, that it doesn't feel organic, right? But if there's a sweet spot there, and this movie hit that, of like, because you meet Keen at the beginning, this Aaron Keen guy, and you're like, oh, that's the bad guy.
Yeah.
Right, like right off the bat you're like, well, obviously that's the bad guy. So when it's revealed that he's the one who hired these guys to kill, and it's like, in order to put STEM into him, all of that, it's like, yeah, obviously, so let's go kill
Yeah.
him now, right?
And well,
And then
we
you get
also
there and it's like, well, one more thing, right?
we also have the just the genre conventions programmed into us of like, typically in these sci-fi stories, it's the businessmen and the tech giants, it's, what is it, OP and RoboCop or whatever, OCP
Yeah,
and RoboCop
OCP,
and
yeah.
Skynet. And, the genre conventions of science fiction action movies tell us like it's always the inventors and the businessmen and the people in suits that are the ones who are ultimately behind the evil. But this takes it, like, that ending takes it beyond that. It's like they are, in a sense, Aaron Keen made STEM, which really, I forgot to talk about how good the guy who does STEM though is. He's really great, the guy who provides the voice for STEM. But it's one step beyond that. It's like they're no longer a factor. Like Aaron Keen at the end of this movie is like in tears because he knows what he's done. Like it's the Oppenheimer moment of this guy like faced with the uh, unfathomable scale of what his creation is capable of and what it is now doing, and he's reduced to nothing at all. It's moved, like,
Yeah.
this thing has moved beyond him. And it's, yeah, I just find that very effective. But yeah, dude, I mean, we didn't talk about it, but on a lighter, sort of lighter note, the guy who plays STEM, I forget his name now. I think he does an incredible job. STEM is very funny and charming for a lot of this movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like there's a scene very early on where Gray like STEM starts speaking to Gray, and Gray freaks out and like doesn't know if he's going crazy or not. And he's like, I need you to be quiet. And so STEM doesn't say anything for a long time. And Gray's immediately, like, are you still there? And he's like, yes, Gray, am I
Yeah.
allowed to speak? Like, it's just a very, in that performance, I think too, is very effective because it lulls you because you like STEM. Like STEM is like kind of like the Terminator and Terminator 2 to an extent, where you we have like, oh, it's a machine that doesn't understand that killing and the decapitating man's face with a knife is bad. It doesn't understand that. But that's okay. Like it's a robot. And
Yeah.
that ultimately gets weaponized against the audience and Gray by the end of the film, because by the end of the film, like, there's no charm to STEM. He's just very clearly in this monotonous like voice telling you like, oh yeah, I did all this. I needed Gray's mind to break, and it broke, and thank you. And then he shoots the
Yeah.
detective like it's nothing, and then he walks out.
It's even sort of a bit of a reveal that personality, that detached, um almost like innocent childlike persona that STEM had at the beginning of the movie was a put on. It was false,
What's
right?
the
Like that's not actually STEM, right? That was also fake,
right?
right?
But what's the
Yeah.
robot in Big Hero 6? BMO? Is it BMO? No, it's
uh
not BMO. But
no,
but
that's Adventure Time.
yeah,
Baymax
Baymax.
is
He's like
yeah.
he reminds me of a very violent Baymax for like the first
Yeah.
third of this movie. That's, if you can think of like an equivalent characterization, like that sort of like childlike, silly aloofness, to it. Except, again, he's like murdering people and stuff. But that is sort of what it feels like. And you're absolutely right. It's like it's sort of a mask off moment by the end. It's
Yeah.
all a ruse to to take over Gray's body. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, before we close it out, I have to bring up the connection into another movie from 2018 that is very, very strikingly similar to this one, which is Venom, which I love. I love the
I was gonna
2018 Venom movie.
I was gonna
It-
ask you how much you love this movie because
yeah.
you brought it up several times before we started taping this. So I was wondering how much you
Yeah.
loved it.
I do. I really, really like Venom. And a lot of the action sequences early on in the movie and sort of the second act, I would say, when Tom Hardy's got the symbiote in him, and now he's got to figure out, how he's going to navigate that. A lot of the humor, a lot of the action is very similar to the beginning of the second act in this movie, to the extent that, like, I think that you can put the first time that Eddie Brock lets Venom do the fighting, and that first fight scene with Gray and Stem, they are the same scene. Just they are the same scene.
Right.
I don't know. They're so close together. They are months apart. So this movie came out. Upgrade came out in, I think it was June of that year, and then Venom came out in October. Now that is still time for them to do a reshoot and to add that in. I don't know if that's the case. If they saw this movie, or if somehow the filmmakers who made Venom were sort of privy to this movie and had seen something, um, and then took a lot of the ideas. It's so strikingly similar. Parallel thought happens all the time, right? Like parallel
Deep
development in
Impact and
films happens,
Armageddon and
and Armageddon. It's
yeah.
it's super, super common that what happens is that somebody has an idea, puts it out into the studio system, um, as a pitch, right? And studio executives, being the upstanding moral citizens that they are, say no to that project, but then go and talk to other people, and then think that they came up with the idea themselves, and then tell somebody else that they should do this in their movie. I think that's more likely what happened here, is that somebody at some point at Sony heard about this movie, or was possibly pitched this movie and saw some proof of concept or something like that, and then eventually like turned around and went to the filmmakers making Venom and went, put this in your movie, like this is how this has to
Right.
go.
Right.
And I mean, it's very natural for that story as well,
Yeah, I
it
mean
takes
that's
it
always been
in a
an aspect.
different direction, right?
Yeah, I mean that's always been an aspect of the duality has always been an aspect of the Venom character.
Yeah, yeah,
Like the empirical we that
yeah.
Venom employed for years. But I think I've only seen this movie once, and it was a while ago. It reminded me of movies from the when my biggest takeaway and aside from when I watched this the first time was like this reminds me of like Daredevil and like Elektra and those style of movies. Not in like a bad way. I didn't think I don't like it as much as you. I remember enjoying it,
Yeah.
but I do think that the specific way the Hardy version um, is characterized as like the relationship between him and the symbiote is very reminiscent of what we get at least at first between Gray and Stem. Um, because it's more, if I remember correctly, it's been so long since I read the comics. It's like way more like Eddie Brock at least in the original when Venom was more of a villain is way more cool with the symbiote doing whatever it wants to and eating people. So,
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean, in the comics, the whole point is that Eddie is willing to do the things that Peter wasn't, right? Like
right,
like Peter rejects the symbiote because it wants violence, whatever. And then it's so difficult because now we have all of these sort of modern takes on it, and so they kind of end up retroactively getting into the
right,
mix, and the idea that, so in the movie Venom, they go into it that like the reason why the symbiote it seeks out violence is because it actually like feeds off of specific chemicals in the brain, right? Like that's the symbiosis, is that it's like it needs those chemicals in order to survive. One of the ways to get that is by committing acts of violence, because it's like adrenaline and blah blah, there's a whole list, right? um and it's also why Venom will eat a human being but just bite their head off, because he just wants the neurochemicals. That's all he's after, right?
Right.
And it's in the movie they have a fun play on it because it's something that's also in chocolate. So the way in the second movie, the way that Eddie keeps him at bay is by just feeding him an excessive amount of chocolate, which endears us to Venom because we all eat too much chocolate, right? So yeah, but that's where I think, like, although they may have come from similar inspiration points and there's a lot of similarities, and Venom is a little bit of a ripoff in that respect. I don't know how intentional that ripoff is. We can't really speak to that. Only the filmmakers can know,
I
but
mean,
and they'll probably never tell us. But they diverge pretty quickly. This goes off, and the third act of this movie resembles nothing of the third act of Venom, which is just a straight up and down superhero movie ending, right? Like,
right.
it's an anti-hero, so it's a little bit edgier, but it is pretty much just, he has to fight the more evil version of himself, and that's it, right? Whereas this movie goes into a completely other place and makes us question humanity and artificial intelligence and our role in our own destruction. So it's kind of a different vibe from Venom, kind of a
Just
different vibe.
like a little bit different.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
But yeah, I had to note it because I saw Venom first, obviously, in 2018, and I do unironically genuinely love that movie
it's a top
for
10
what
for
it
you.
is. It's one of those things.
So a perfect 10.
It's yeah. It is a perfect 10, but we have a thing that we do where we do imperfect tens for April Fools, and Venom fits more into that category than it fits into a proper perfect 10.
Mm,
But yeah, it is the mirror reflection of this film, and I think, like, that's one of the great things, is that, like, it's possible to like both. You don't There doesn't need to be competition between the two of them. You can actually give them both your money, and be the whole world is better for it. I think that there's a people would want to take, like, an adversarial stance of, like, Venom ripped this off, and it's like, you know what? Just tell everybody to go see Upgrade. Like, tell everybody to rent this movie. Like that's did you like that stuff in Venom? Well, go watch a better version of it. It actually, I think, is a great marketing tool. So Venom, I think, maybe did favors to this movie rather than eat its lunch.
yeah.
And their openings were so far apart that neither one affected the other. But yeah, it's just, I think it's a funny footnote in talking about this movie to talk about how Venom is so similar.
Yeah.
Well, was there anything else you wanted to cover before we wrap it up?
I don't think so, man. I think we actually covered a lot. I mean, I think there's always like this is the type of movie, man, where there's
Yeah,
always going to be something to say about it. Like anytime I don't think it's a movie I rewatch actually pretty regularly. At least once or twice a year I'll pop this in. Like a night will it'll hit me and I'm like, "Oh yeah, I want to be real depressed about the future of humanity tonight," and I'll just pop this baby in
yeah,
and watch it. And but like I said, even I've probably seen it um probably like 8 or 9 times at this point. Like not a super like crazy amount, but I've seen it pretty regularly since I first watched it. And every time there's something new, and like even
yeah,
this time, and even things you said to me, like that I didn't notice watching it over the course of the last few years, like on repeat, like stuff to think about, and just really, really great decisions. I mean, it's a perfect 10 to me. It is one of my favorite movies of the past 20 years. I would definitely it would I don't rank things. I'm not very good at ranking things because I always like I'm like, oh, but I really love that thing too. But anyway, um I would say it has to be in my top 10 movies of the last like 10 years at
yeah,
least. Um it it um and I genuinely think it's one of the best genre movies of the 21st century. It is a hidden gem. It deserves a much higher status in society than currently where it sits. Like Upgrade is a movie um, I'll bring up to people, and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, I think I know. I think I saw a trailer for that." Like they don't, but there's no cultural con. But anybody who's seen it, like every once in a while, I'll run it, usually on like online and some online space. Anyone who's seen it loves it. Like they love it. They are passionately like about it. I've showed it to pretty much like this and The Nice Guys are the movies from the past like decade that like if you come into contact me, I've shown you these movies. I've been like, yes,
Mm.
you need to watch this. You need to watch this. Um, and but I always with a caveat, like you are going to be a little depressed when it's over. I'm really sorry, but it's genuinely incredible. So, um, but yeah, no, definitely a perfect 10, a masterpiece. I love it from the bottom of my heart.
Excellent. Awesome. Well, I mean, I think we did our job here. I think we can consider this case closed. Yeah, it is without a doubt a perfect 10, and more people need to see it. It's criminally underwatched. And so hopefully people did, listen to the beginning of this if they hadn't seen it and they went and they watched it and then they came back and finished. But if you did make it all the way through this conversation without having seen the movie yet, please, please, please go watch it, because our conversation, although I think we had a great one, it's not going to do it justice.
No.
There is a visual
Yes.
there's a visual finesse to this movie that you have to experience it. Like, and please, 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 in a quiet room, right? Like as quiet as you can get, with the lights turned down
Yep.
and no distractions. Put your phone in another room,
Yeah. Just
right? Whatever you have to do in order to stay locked into this movie. It is a shame that I didn't get to see this in the theater, because that would have been the
same.
ideal environment, obviously.
Same.
But thankfully, I mean, I got a 70-inch TV. It's pretty good. So I everybody was asleep. Crystal was in the bedroom reading a book, and so I was able to just like really zone in on it and get into it. So I like, to me, that's the ideal environment to enjoy this film. You have to see the visuals along with the great thematic story stuff that's going on, because it's a 1-2 punch. It's a really, really masterfully made film.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me really interested in this other stuff that Whannell's got in the hopper, because the Wolfman is one of them in
Well, he
pre-production.
did The Invisible
um
Man with
yeah,
oh gosh, and that was
yeah.
great. Not It's not on the
Now I
level
want
of
to see it. Now I
Upgrade.
want to watch it.
Oh no,
Yeah.
you should. No, it's great. I
Um
saw that in the theaters and I loved it. I thought it was great.
okay.
Um,
I And then Green Hornet and Kato, like, okay, what's Whannell's take gonna be on Green Hornet and Kato? I
yeah,
am down for that, because I love those characters, not just from the 1960s stuff, but like in the comics as well. Like, the Green Hornet is a really, really underrepresented superhero,
yeah.
and Kato has an interesting legacy as a character that is. I'm curious. My curiosity is piqued after having watched this movie. So, if you're listening to this in the future and either of these movies have come out at this point, I wonder what your opinion is of what we've said about Upgrade, because they can go, both of those can go one of two ways, which is they'll either be incredible or they'll be just trash.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I
Because
even like
you're dealing with existing stuff, but
yeah. I mean, I like like I said, I loved his Invisible Man. I like Joe Johnston's
yeah.
Wolfman. I don't think it's a great movie, but I like that too. So I'm kind of predisposed
Mm,
to liking the Universal monster stuff if one else tackling all that. But I really want him to do more stuff like this, like things that
yeah.
he's just dreaming up and imagining. I mean, I don't know if I really want an Upgrade 2 or even an Upgrade TV series. I don't really think it needs that. But I'm open to it if, I'm open. I'm open to whatever. As long as the quality's there, I'm open to it. If something's good, it's good. It doesn't matter, if it's a franchise or whatever. So,
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
yeah, man.
for sure. Awesome. Well, I think that does it for this one. I thank you, Jim, for hanging out. When we do this and it's like, we've, like I said at the beginning, this is our first time talking to each other. This is one of those things that can go one of two ways. And I'm so glad that it went as well as it did, because I think this is a great episode, and I think that people really, really enjoy this conversation. So thank you for joining me. If people want to keep up with you online, where can they do that?
Mostly I basically exist only on Twitter at
Yeah.
Jim with three M's Mello, GAIMMMELLO. And then I also have a Patreon for my writing, which is also just Patreon/Jim Mello. But yeah, that's where you can catch me. You can read my, I wrote, one of the first things I wrote on there for the patrons was an essay about Upgrade. I think it was like literally
Oh, nice.
the second month I had it up, I wrote about it, because it's just a movie that stuck with me, and continues to stay with me. So then, yes, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so stoked that this was a lot of fun, man. I'm glad. I mean,
Awesome.
I was worried too, because it's hard to find someone who is as enthusiastic about this movie, because, as we said, no one said it. So it was really nice that you measured
Yeah.
my enthusiasm on it. I was worried I was just going to end up like screaming the entire time. So
It's a wonderful thing when I get to do one of these episodes about something that I'm actually not as familiar with, and because the people that I have on, I trust and respect the opinions of. I know that I'm going to be in for at least a good time, right? Like it might not end up being my favorite thing, but the two instances that I can think of, this and Roman Holiday, is one of the other. Actually, three, because Casanova as well. When Ty got me to watch Casanova, I was like, where has this movie been all my life? This is fantastic. Roman Holiday, again, was like when Missy was like, let's watch Roman Holiday, I was like, all right. And it was black and white. Let's go for it. I went to film school. I can hang. I've ended up on the other side of it as an evangelist of these films. So,
man.
but
Dude,
again,
Roman
that is
Holiday.
because the people that I have on, I gotta trust that you guys know what you're talking
Dude,
about. I respect your opinions.
You want to talk old movies anytime? Oh my gosh, dude. Roman Holiday is incredible, man. You got to watch Philadelphia Story. You got to watch Bringing Up Baby if you want some good old screwball comedy. Oh my God. Yeah, man. Now you're just making me want to go down another rabbit hole. But yeah,
well,
that's awesome.
we'll revisit this for sure. We'll have you back, and we'll get into let's get into something ancient, something black and white, something that makes people super uncomfortable to watch, but is a classic. So, awesome. Thank you again, Jim. Thank you everyone for listening to ThunderQuack Perfect 10. If you found joy in today's discussion, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast service and leave a rating and review. And if you want to chat about today's episode, you can head over to our Discord at thunderquack.com/Discord. And of course, you can also support us on Patreon, patreon.com/ThunderQuack. Until next time, remember, it's not about the score, it's about the love. Stay geeky, everyone. ThunderQuack Perfect 10 is hosted by me, Michael Cohn. Follow us on Twitter at ThunderQuackPod, on Instagram at ThunderQuackPodcast, on Facebook at ThunderQuack, and join us on Discord at thunderquack.com/Discord. Support the podcast by heading to patreon.com/ThunderQuack to get early access, bonus episodes, and the ThunderQuack Perfect 10 Pop Quiz. ThunderQuack Perfect 10 is part of the ThunderQuack Podcast Network. Thanks for listening.